Welcome to Slate School and our panel discussion entitled Learning with Purpose. Slate School is committed to excellence in education. We are delighted to present the Education Idea Lab, which is a new, unique virtual series that is free and open to the public. This thought-leading event convenes leaders, change makers, and participants from all sectors of education and innovation. Thank you for joining us. We're thrilled to have all of you with us here today. My name is Julie Mountcastle, and I'm head of school at Slate School. So I'll briefly introduce you to Slate School, review the panel logistics, and then we'll hear from our 6 expert panelists. Slate School is an independent 501c3 nonprofit elementary school where education is focused on cultivating creativity, fostering ingenuity, and inspiring a deep passion for lifelong learning. At Slate School, we have formed a community that is constantly striving to improve practice, to create meaningful educational experiences for learners of all ages, and to change the landscape in education. Slate School convenes experts for important, authentic conversations about education, and these online dialogues, like today's, are free and open to the public. We're so delighted to have all of you with us today. Now, I'll describe the basic logistics of this discussion. We have 6 amazing panelists, and they have a wealth of experience to share with you during the next hour. Each of our panelists today will give a 2-minute introduction about themselves, their current role, and their key guidance and advice about purpose in education. We'll then proceed with the panel discussion. We'll proceed with having our panelists introduce themselves, and I am delighted to introduce you to our first panelist, Christopher Brown. Hi, Christopher.
Hello. Just a brief introduction of who I am. I am a professor at the University of Texas at Austin, Department of Curriculum Instruction. I'm a former kindergarten, first grade, and preschool teacher. The work I do here always is focused on how can we support pre-service teachers, teacher educators, and other stakeholders in thinking about how we can make sense of and integrate policymakers' reforms into our teaching in a way that supports the development and learning of all children in our classrooms. So I've always been thinking about the purpose of education being a place where we can create a learning environment that fosters, it sustains, it extends, the complex educational, contextual, cultural, individual goals and aspirations of the teachers, the children, and the families themselves. So we've been working on different ways of thinking about how we can do that in practice. Advocating for things like I've worked with some colleagues on an idea we call rigorous DAP to give us some language to speak to the demands for accountability in a way that shows that we know how children and families and teachers can work together to support the learning of everyone so that we can create a really, what Dewey's talking about, this vision of a democratic society.
Beautiful. Awesome. Thank you so much. And now I'd like to introduce you to Cheryl Charles. Morning, Cheryl.
Hi there. Thank you. It's my pleasure to be with you all. I would say themes in my career have always been children, youth, community, and the environment. I'm really dedicated to trying to optimize environments where people thrive. And so I began as a high school teacher very early, still in my 20s, was asked to be founding national director of an interdisciplinary kindergarten through high school program to integrate ecological concepts into the mainstream of schooling. The first of those was Project Learning Tree. The second of those was Project Wild. And they're still out there. I haven't been involved for decades, but I'm delighted that they're still helping provide teachers, elementary and secondary, with ways to, even preschoolers, integrate ecological concepts into schooling. Currently, actually in 2006, I founded the Children and Nature Network with Richard Louv, the author, and have continued this work to try to connect people of all ages to the natural world. I serve on a local school board. I am CEO Emerita of the Children and Nature Network. I teach a course at Antioch on nature-based learning, and I serve as a member of the steering committee for the International Union for the Conservation of Nature's Commission on Education and Communication. Just all about, again, connecting people with the natural world for their health and well-being and that of the earth itself.
Beautiful. Lots of hats. Lots of hats. And I'd like to introduce you to Judy Cuthbertson. Judy, good morning.
Good morning. So nice to be with all of you. I've been in the field of elementary education for actually 50 years. First as a special education teacher, and then as a mixed age group teacher at the Foot School in New Haven, Connecticut. I was a head teacher there writing curriculum. And while I was there, I developed with some other people, something called the Seedlings Educators Collaborative. And what we are a collaborative of independent and public and parochial school teachers who meet with a week-long workshop. And it's a place-based and a project-based workshop based on early childhood best practices and also on age-appropriate activities. And what we do is we meet for a week, and our idea is to connect teachers with each other, to connect teachers with local resources, to connect teachers with local mentors, where they come together and they write an age-appropriate curriculum with a STEAM focus. And beyond that, for the last decade, I've made kind of a full circle from working in public schools, then a career in private schools, and now I'm back in public schools as a curriculum consultant in the city of New Haven, where I work in 3 or 4 schools, working with teachers, trying to figure out how to move them from a very strict skill-based curriculum to one that more focuses on what children need at that time. So the last 50 years, it's all really been about child development and how I can help teachers support them in their role of getting children to learn in many different ways.
Wonderful. Thank you, Judy.
You're welcome.
And now I just introduce you to Rebecca Fraser-Thill. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rebecca Fraser-Thill. I teach at Bates College, where I've been since 2003. I teach psychology with a focus on developmental psychology. So I get to talk about the whole lifespan. And I'm also the director of faculty engagement and outreach for our Bates Center for Purposeful Work. And Purposeful Work is an initiative at Bates that we started many years ago. I was able to be involved from the get-go, which is very exciting, to think about how do we help our college students develop a sense of purposeful work, by which we mean both their paid and unpaid work in their lives, and what they're doing that feels both meaningful to themselves and also has an impact beyond themselves. So curricular, co-curricular, all of the different facets of the student as a whole being, we support them in a variety of ways and impact them at all levels, right on from the moment they walk onto campus and well beyond after they've graduated, which I'm sure we'll get to talk more about.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. And I just say good morning to Brian Heuser. Good morning, Brian.
Good morning, Julie. Good morning to all of you as well. So I am a full-time faculty member in the Department of Leadership, Policy, and Organizations at Peabody College of Education and Human Development. I'm also at Vanderbilt. I'm also the faculty director for the Ingram Scholars Program, which is a program that is endowment funded for about 40 student scholars who demonstrate very high academic achievement, who have also made a profound commitment to using their careers to improve the common good. And so I sort of have a dream job. I get to facilitate the dreams, desires, sometimes hubris, hopefully not too much, right? But of world changers. And we have an incredible alumni network from over the last 25 years. So, so that's some of my most challenging work here at Vanderbilt.
Fantastic. So glad you're here. And last but not least, certainly, Sylvia Martinez. Hi, Sylvia.
Hello. Thanks for having me here. My name is Sylvia Martinez. I have a lot of different jobs. I'm the co-author of Invent to Learn, Making Tinkering and Engineering in the Classroom, which has led to some of my most recent work in working with schools to create opportunities for students to have hands-on experiences with really futuristic modern technology, and helping teachers understand how that connects with real work. I'm also running a publishing company, helping teachers write their own stories, write their own books about how they do things in the classroom, because a lot of times teachers are like super busy and then everyone says, oh, this isn't happening in real classrooms, but it actually is. So trying to make those stories come alive in the world. And I've always had a lot of different jobs. I've been an aerospace engineer. My degree's in electrical engineering. I've been a video game designer, and it's weird that through those things I became interested in learning. And now this whole maker movement and hands-on experiential learning kind of like brings this all back to my engineering roots, because it's super fun to make things, and it's super fun to make things work. And to feel like you have the ability to change the world is a really great thing. And I think that giving students those opportunities at home or in school is really important.
That's great. Thank you so much, Sylvia. You know, at Slate School, we're always saying school is wherever you are. If you're on a school bus, school is the school bus. If you're at home, home is school. If you're at school, school is school. It doesn't matter where you are, you're always learning, so school is everywhere, and never has that been more true. So great to have you all with us. I think we should just jump right in. So Christopher, you mentioned Dewey, you mentioned John Dewey, and that's perfect lead in, because he said sort of famously, education is not preparation for life, education is life itself. And I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit to his ideal of school being integrated with work and purpose, and maybe even talk a little bit about how you think this vision is best achieved in schools today, even though he lived quite a while ago.
I think there's a couple different ways to come at this question. I think it's a really good question. I think one, from more of a academic sense, is we really have to recognize how people learn. We make sense of the world by experiencing it. We make sense by watching, observing, interacting with others. And so to be able to do that, we have to have a school environment that allows children to do that, and that teaches them how to interact with each other, so that we can foster this democratic society. Unfortunately, we're seeing the work I do here is a lot of schools are places where kids are taught this is a specific set of knowledge they need to learn, and this is how they need to learn it, and then this is how they need to show it. Am I not unmuted? I'm sorry, just make sure. I'm sorry.
No, you're okay. It's just a little bit for a second, kind of funny, but
okay, I apologize.
No, you're...
So within that, we really, I think one thing we have to do as teachers, if we're thinking about teachers in the classroom, we have a responsibility to figure out what is it the kids and the families we work with, what are their hopes and dreams for their children in school? And then if you're working in a public school context, also knowing what the curricular expectations are on you. And thinking about, as Dewey would say, how could you find that balance between these hopes and dreams of the children we're working with and the expectations that we were supposed to be accomplishing in our classrooms during that time. And so to do that, you really have to have a deep pedagogical knowledge, a deep content knowledge around the things you're supposed to be accomplishing throughout the school year, and trying to build a bridge between those two things with the kids. And there's lots of different curricular projects you can engage in. Mentioned earlier, like project work is a nice way to start thinking about how you can integrate curriculum in the classroom. And there's other curricular models you could use, but just, I don't have a lot of time. So I just want to also think one thing we have to also think about, if we really want to create a place where schools is a place where kids come in to integrate and learn, we have to speak back to policymakers about what's happening in our schools. Asking them questions like, coming from the work of Amos Hash, how are you supporting our schools to be a place where kids can learn to participate in our larger democracy? I mean, how are you ensuring that schools are a place where students can maximize their potential? How are we creating schools that inspire kids, teach them how to be democratic citizens? So there's this large conversation happening politically we need to be engaged with. But then in the classroom as teachers, we also need to think about how are we thinking about who our kids are, how they learn, and bring that learning into the classroom in a way that's meaningful for them and their families so that they can accomplish the goals they want to accomplish and leave schools to be able to participate in the larger democratic society.
Great, yes. Brian, you're a teacher of future leaders, and they're probably already leaders, but you have great influence with them, I'm sure. And I'm just wondering how you share with them the role of purpose and vision and curiosity in leadership. How do you model that for them? And then, how do you hope they take that to the world? What does that mean for you?
I am now unmuted. It's a great question, Julie. First, I want to say I think actually the leadership of Slate School exemplifies this. I don't want everybody who's on this to know that I did have the great joy of spending a day at Slate School, better understanding your model, and I do think you all exemplify this. Let me put my global health hat on, if I may. I'll move from pedagogy to global health and then back. I teach a class in global health leadership and management for physicians, nurse practitioners, other clinical folks, and also MPH students. And it's one of my favorite classes. I've been doing it for about 8 years, and purpose, vision, and curiosity are utterly seminal to good leadership today. I'm not just saying this anecdotally, but in fact, increasingly, we know that old models of leadership have really ossified. They've atrophied. They have been, number one, male dominant. They've been dominant around sort of characteristics as opposed to processes, right? And so when we think about purpose, vision, curiosity, we're really talking about connecting the lived experiences of leaders with the purposes of their organizations, right? There's a sign behind me from Einstein that says, strive not to be a success, rather be a value, right? And I think that the best leaders are the ones that are able to look inside themselves and say, this is my value, and this is the vision of the organization. And how do we align those in very strategic ways that allows everyone within the organization to be a leader? Humility is a huge part here, right? And I have an entire lecture on this. I won't do it, but in 30 seconds, humility is incredibly important. We know that asking questions in organizations and listening, radical listening to the stakeholders of the organization brings about better results. We know that diverse teams and diverse perspectives, whether it's on corporate boards or it's on project-based teams, produces better results, right? And we know that leaders who foster a sense of curiosity, which many organizations resist, they think that it will produce inefficiencies, right? They push back on it and say, no, it's going to produce chaos. In fact, it does exactly the opposite, right? It allows people to actually find their places in the organizations where they can connect their own values to the values of the organization. I'll stop there.
Wow, great. Rebecca, I'm curious. I know that you mentioned earlier in your introduction that your college has developed a program about purposeful work, and I'm just wondering how that happened. You said you were part of it from the get-go. I'm wondering how that emerged, and then I'm wondering what that looks like in practice. How do you engage your students in that kind of purposeful work?
Yes, wonderful question. And I've been so excited to be a part of purposeful work at Bates College. We're up in Maine, and we had a new president come in 2012, President Clayton Spencer. And during her inaugural address, she said that she believed purposeful work was a core concern of the liberal arts. So she put her stake in the ground right from the start, and then very thoughtfully convened faculty, staff, students to talk about, well, what would that mean to have purposeful work as a core concern of the liberal arts? And she convened a working group based on a number of conversations. So great listening, indeed, to say, okay, now this small working group of faculty, staff, and students come up with a conceptual case for this at Bates. And we spent an entire year. So I was very fortunate to be a member of that because I had been teaching an upper level developmental psychology seminar that was all focused on the search for meaning and purpose across the lifespan. So I was pretty well suited to jump into that working group and spend some time thinking about what's the conceptual case for an entire year before we started building out programming. And then I got to be the director of program design during a 3-year period where we literally had a tiny team of 3 of us who worked in a design space separate from our career development center to really think about what would this look like across the campus, to get the whole campus involved in thinking about purposeful work. What's the programming? So we started doing small pilots and iterating on those pilots and scaling up to the extent that now 95 to 96% of our graduating seniors are engaged in purposeful work in some way, and many of them are engaged in many different ways. And so some of the ways this looks include having job shadows and internships that aren't just your traditional job shadows and internships, but actually very much focus on preparing students for those experiences, having them reflect meaningfully on the experiences while they're in them and afterwards, and really has a full, like the internships have a presentation component too, which involves that reflective element. So students can think about purpose, which from the psychology definition is about having a direction that's meaningful to yourself, and also that has impact beyond yourself. And so our belief is that if students are having experiences where they're gaining their ability to think about what is meaningful to me, what are my skills, my values, my personality, my interests, and how does that relate to the world's needs? And if they do that, for instance, their job shadows, through their internships, but also in some innovative programming we've created in the curriculum, including practitioner taught courses. We have a nice little 5-week spring session that we offer. And that's an opportunity where we bring in some practitioners, often alumni of Bates, but also friends of Bates, who come and teach about hands-on subjects that aren't a part of our existing curriculum. Things like urban planning and entrepreneurship and music production, and the list goes on and on. And again, reflection is baked into what students are doing during those 5-week courses. But then the rest of the year, we have these wonderful infusion program that existing faculty members, and right now we're up to about 46% of our faculty members have offered classes where they actively engage students in thinking about the connections between the course content and purposeful work. So careers, meaning, purpose, and work. And students really love those classes. They're high scale. And those are just some of the ways. We've got obviously some great counseling that we offer students. We're doing things in the athletic space, so in the co-curricular space, having the reflective elements. And it's really about students gaining this skill set of being able to be thoughtful about their current work as students, so that when they are getting to the stage of their paid work and also their community involvement and caregiving in a variety of ways, they can embark in that in a meaningful, purposeful fashion.
Wow. Yes. I've promised myself that I won't say much today because we have so many wonderful contributors, but as you were talking, I was thinking, at our school, even the 5-year-olds have a practice of setting goals and commitments each week. And the idea being that each week they would say something they want to do, and it could be anything. I want to be able to do a better cartwheel, or to be able to run faster. And then they set a public commitment for themselves each week, and I'm gonna practice my cartwheel 5 times every day. And the whole group says, awesome, we'll hold you to it. And then at the end of the week, everybody kind of reports out about how they were able to fulfill their commitment, not really about whether they met their goal. And so then to think about refining and changing and reflecting about what the commitments they made and whether or not they were fruitful and how they might need to adjust those. And we see such incredible growth from 5-year-olds as they understand better what a really good commitment looks like. And it makes their work so much more meaningful to them because it really is them crafting it, and it's a beautiful practice. So that's all I'm going to say. I was hoping to hear a little bit from Cheryl about just listening to all that you were saying, Rebecca. I just wonder if maybe, Cheryl, you could offer a different perspective about how maybe some examples when you saw students feeling effective and really learning in deep and meaningful ways because their learning was rooted in purpose. Could you speak to that?
Thank you so much for that question. I'm going to actually build a little bit on what Rebecca was saying and Brian, and then lead it back into the examples you were just asking about. But I'll start with the word meaningful. When I looked at the question and I thought about purpose, I'm really trying to have people experience things that matter to them in their lives. And so that's tied to purpose, and it always results in something being meaningful. And I'd like to frame this a little bit in the comments about leadership that Brian was making. I alluded early on to a course in nature-based leadership that I teach at Antioch University, New England. And about 5 years ago now, I was asked to become the executive director of a new institute. They had already formed a nature-based leadership institute at Antioch. And I say this because the principles of nature-based leadership are ecological. And they tie to things like diversity that Brian was mentioning. Another way of thinking about humility is that these are natural guides to leadership, natural guides to community building that I use. And so 2 examples, one is diversity and the other is niche or niche. And that is that every organism has a contribution to make. And when we think about that, that allows us to be inherently humble because everyone has a contribution to make. And so in any kind of learning environment, when we take that approach, we recognize that everyone in the community is important, has value. And then thinking about examples, because I do, for a variety of reasons, think it's so compelling and urgently needed to connect people of all ages with the natural world, wherever we live, learn, work, and play. I think about the benefits to people of all ages in doing that. And when we can learn in context, I'll think of one example. I'll give you one example. I was speaking to 700 4th and 5th graders. That was a challenge in itself in an assembly in Rockford, Illinois, a few years ago. And I knew they'd been talking about what nature-based experience meant to them, how was it meaningful in their lives. And I'd been talking, here I am looking at this sea of children, right? And I, after describing some of the things that are going on, changes in childhood, sedentary lifestyles, not walking to school anymore for so many, and just a sedentary lifestyle overly hooked into electronic media. So I thought, well, I'm going to ask, I know the kids have been talking about it, I'm going to see if anybody will come up here on stage with me and talk about why they think nature is important in their lives. So I ended up with a handful of children, 4th and 5th graders with me up there, and the first of those who spoke said, nature is important to me. When I go outside and I learn to love the natural world, I believe I'll take better care of it. And then she said, I also know that when I'm outdoors in nature, I feel better. I calm down. I can relax, and I just feel refreshed, and I can learn. And then a little bit later, that's just one example, but it ties to everything the evidence tells us, that children tend to be better off, adults as well, calmer, better health, in better health. It's physiological, it's social, it's emotional, it's cognitive, all of those benefits that arise. When I finished the talk, and this same little girl came up to me, and again, 11 and 12-year-old, 10, 11, 12, 10, 11 mostly. At any rate, she said, Dr. Charles, she said, what does it mean? Doctors tell me that I've got ADHD. And she said, and I said, well, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Well, that's what they tell me I have. What I love about that story is that she knew she felt better, would calm down, and could focus herself more meaningfully after time and when time was spent in the natural world.
Yeah, great. Boy, there's so many things I want to ask about that. I want to ask Judy, though, you may be preaching to the choir here, but there also may be people listening today that are not as familiar with this kind of educating. And I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how children learn academic skills through authentic experience. And when they do that, maybe you can talk about how intentional teachers are in those situations, and then how teachers assess what the child is learning.
Sure, I'd be happy to. It's a great question, and it's something that I think about every day, all day. And I think, first of all, to start with that, you know, what seems so obvious to me now as an educator sure wasn't obvious when I started. I started as a special ed teacher, which was very scripted. I had many, many children with many, many issues. So my goals were very limited for them. And then all of a sudden I popped into education at the Foot School, a progressive school, and a mixed age group of first and second graders. And when I started there, I did think that I needed to teach them stuff and that I would then, as Christopher said, figure out, well, this is what I taught them, and now I know that they know it because they said what I told them to say. And pretty soon it occurred to me that it was not great for them, and it wasn't great for me. So I started going back, you know, this is 30, 40 years ago, and saying, what is this all about to teach children? Like, how do we teach them the skills, but how do we also teach them in a meaningful, purposeful way? And I guess, although it sounds simplistic, the way to begin is to listen. And although that seems easy, when I'm working with teachers and groups in the New Haven public schools, it's hard. They don't really know what it means to really listen to children because they don't give children, you know, not always through their fault, but through the scheduling and what's happening in public schools, there's not a lot of time for conversation, and there's not a lot of time for oral language, exactly the two things that most children really need in the inner city anyhow. So for that, I would say kids like to make stuff, they like to do stuff, and they are incredibly productive and industrious. All it takes is to look at the kids on the playground trying to build a shelter or trying to come up with new rules for a game. You cannot get them to stop, to come back in the classroom. So it occurred to me, that's what I needed to do. I needed to listen to them on the playground, and then I needed to bring that back into the classroom. And so the first thing I did was I sat and I listened to a group of first graders who every single day just smashed rocks. That's all they did. They had goggles on, but they smashed rocks. And then they started trying to put them together into a wall. And then it occurred to them that in Connecticut, we have a lot of walls. We have a lot of rock walls. So even though it seemed pretty abstract for first and second graders, we started talking about walls. And they started coming up with questions about how do you build them. And every day they would try to come up with different mortar. And every day they would talk about stability. And then we would start bringing in people like an architect to talk about an arch. And that led to completely different things like, I mean, the thing that changed me, I think, as a teacher is a comment that a child said to me that I could not believe was a first grader. And they said, are walls built to keep people in or to keep people out? How does that work? And that created an entire class-wide focus on walls and how do you build them and the stability and what's the meaning of a wall. It took us to the Beinecke Library at Yale University to look at a translucent wall. We started looking at what natural materials were. What did people build with when they wanted to build walls? Why did they build walls? What's the geology of Connecticut so that we have all these walls? And it ended up with a child ended up going to the Wailing Wall over March break and explaining how people put their wishes and their hopes into this wall. And the children in the class said, can we do that? And will you bring them with us? And this was like something that was very meaningful to me as a teacher. And I said yes, thinking, well, what do 6- and 7-year-olds bring to the Wailing Wall? What are they wishing for? And I have to say, none of them were trivial. They were all things like, we wish for you what we have here in terms of health. I mean, it was really incredible. And we then started talking about walls of other places and how, so the point of it is that I am preaching to the choir, but within that, we had rich literature, we had poetry, we had mathematical things, we had physics in terms of how the walls were made. We had the whole kind of cultural things about children started asking, are there walls that aren't things? Are there walls that keep people apart that we can't touch? And it was really kind of an eye-opening, amazing moment to me. So, to say when children work towards goals that matter, their capacity to learn multiplies in a way that most teachers don't see, because they don't have the luxury to be able to really take the time to listen to what children are asking to do, to make their lives purposeful. And when they do, it changes, it sort of clicks in your head. Now, I have to say that, but I also have to say that I was supported at a wonderful progressive school that had a lot of facilities and had a lot of, a lot of things that could make these things happen. I've now been back in the public schools, and it changes. It changes completely, and that's, I feel like I'm swimming upstream, and I am a lot of the time, but it's not that the teachers don't want to do this. They have not been allowed to. And even administrators, I work with a lot of principals, and they are really under the gun too, which at another point I hope to get back to assessment, because I've spent the last years really thinking and trying to reach out to people at the Yale Child Study Center and other places to talk about what is really important about assessing. And obviously we assess what we value, and we need to have that discussion about, are we really, do we really want to take one little part of a child pencil and paper test in time, which really predicts nothing in terms of their future goals and how happy they're going to be as a human being? Or are we really going to think about how we can assess reading in a meaningful way in terms of what books are in the classroom and how their conversations are getting much more complex, or inquiry, or flexible thinking, or collaboration, or curiosity and engagement. And even though I think people can do that, and we can do that, what I'm being pushed to do is to put metrics to it. And that's really hard. And I think it's possible to be done, but I think that's something that at our teacher workshop that we do, is that we talk about what is important in education. And I just want to say one thing about that workshop. There are lots of workshops that focus on STEAM, and I think, and they're all probably wonderful, but one of the things that we do is we have decided that we wanted to bring teachers together. Part of it is self-care, and to bring teachers back to why they went into teaching at the beginning. And what we do find is a lot of emotional issues with the teachers who will actually fall apart during the first part of the workshop, or at the beginning, saying, I now know why I went into teaching. I don't do any of this anymore. It's not part of my life, and it makes me feel horrible. Right. And so part of what we do is to bring them back to the way they're doing, what they brought them in the beginning, and then what we try to do is support them within their classrooms as much as we can to be able to do purposeful work.
Great. Sylvia, I saw you nodding over there when she was talking about the making of the wall. And I think that, what you do with tinkering and making things, I think that it's so powerful. And I think sometimes as an educator, I don't know enough about that myself. And so it would be so valuable, I think, for all of us to hear, in situations where administrations and maybe even teachers are not as prepared to do that kind of work. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how they could infuse that element into their teaching and still feel as though they're maintaining their mission, be it given to them by the administration or their mission of serving the children, while doing that other piece.
Oh, yeah, this is all just fascinating. I think I was nodding at everything everyone was saying. I think what Judy was just saying is that this curriculum that people talk about, these academics, these skills, are a living thing. People misunderstand that. People think you get handed this book of stuff and you just do it. And it's a profound misunderstanding about what teaching is and about what learning is. Curriculum has opinion behind it, and that opinion is often goes unsaid and unspoken. And I believe that the key to what I do anyway is, when I work with schools, is helping teachers articulate what they believe about learning. Christopher said this. If you don't know what you believe about learning, or you're being blown by the winds, or you're being just told, just do it, I think you get trapped into dead ends and things you just don't understand. You're just doing it because it's always been done. And learning, it's something that you develop over time. You know, I think about Piaget, who said knowledge is a consequence of experience. Well, that's a piece of it. And so that learning happens inside the head. Learning is personal. There's no such thing as doing learning. I hear this language all the time. We're gonna do the learning. It's like, it just drives me crazy. You know, it's like you can't do mindfulness or do empowerment to kids. Empowerment comes from doing powerful things. Learning comes from the experiences that you have, and they're completely different because everyone's head is completely different. Everyone's lived experience is completely different. So when you talk about curriculum, I think, as another famous person whose name I'm not sure who said this, but said something like, it's the height of hubris to say that there's a curriculum before you've even met the children. And you know, when you know what you believe about learning, you can take a situation and say, well, here's what I can do best in that situation. And you know, I'm still an engineer in my head. It's sort of like when you build a building. You don't just take a plan and plop it on you know, any old place. You have to know what the soil is. You have to know what the constraints are of the situation you're in. You can't just take a curriculum and plop it into a random teacher, random kids, random community, you know, random leadership. It has to come from the people who are in the system. And if the people in the system aren't clear on what they believe about learning, then you just get a hodgepodge. You just get a mixed up, you know, we're doing the best we can, but we don't know why. And I think that like every building doesn't have to look the same, every classroom doesn't have to look the same, but if people are clear about what they believe, they can manage to adapt to their own constraints. So I think that's super important. I work with a lot of teachers and they say, you know, they would hear what Judy said and they would go, what are you talking about? We're going to talk about a wall for 6 months? What are you nuts? You know, people always exaggerate. People always have this weird idea that, you know, the kids are either sitting in polyester uniforms in rows and never speaking, or they're out in a field somewhere with flowers in their hair, barefoot, walking around, discovering everything. And it's like, no, it's like there's a lot going on in between. And when teachers can have that feeling of knowing in their hearts what they believe is best, they can deal with the constraints of the system. And there's always constraints. You know, one of the things that we want to do in the professional development that we run is try and remove as many constraints that the teachers have to deal with, whether it's for an hour or a day or 4 days. And then they can feel what learning feels like without any constraints. And then when they go back into their system where there's constraints, they can say, well, wait a second. Is this really necessary? Does a period have to be 42 minutes? They start to question things, and that feels very scary. So that's where the leadership comes in and says, you're not lost. We will help you. We will walk through this together. We're gonna invent school that works for all of us together. And because here's what we believe about learning, and here's what our situation is. So, you know, I think that this idea that, you know, curriculum is something that can just be handed around is absolute poison. And it's something that people look to because they want a simple solution. And there just isn't. And that's a hard realization too.
Yeah, I think you're right. And you know what? It's interesting because I think one of the things that we're talking about for our students, and you alluded to it, is something that we should all be demanding for ourselves. And that is, you know, the ability that we should all be pursuing our unique purpose as educators. And you said that, and I think that that's also in the current environment sometimes challenging. I recognize I'm in a unique position and I get to do that, but I know that many of my colleagues do not. And I wonder, listening to this conversation, and maybe Christopher, you could talk to this, is if we're all sitting here saying, boy, this is exactly how it should go, and We know that we need agency, and we want our children to have agency in order to pursue their unique purpose, because they're all different, and the world is only going to be made better by them becoming the best version of that. It's a head scratcher, I guess, why we're all still sitting here wondering why education hasn't moved in that direction as a whole. And I'm wondering if you have a thought about why we haven't done that. And then maybe if anybody wants to chime in with advice on what we can all do to sort of help move education in that way.
I think you asked a really important question. And I think both Judy and Sylvia, the last two answers, have really tried to get at this in many different ways. I think one of the things that we need to ask ourselves as a society is, why have we bought into achievement tests being a marker of learning? I mean, why do we keep seeing test scores as the way to say whether or not schools are good? So I think we really need to think about what it is we want for our schools to be. I think questions like Judy was asking is, are kids happy? Can they problem solve? Do they see themselves as learners? Do they see themselves as part of a community that they want to help support and make better? And I think that's a real thing that we need to ask ourselves as a society. And then I also think, getting on Sylvia's point, is as teachers, we need to ask ourselves, what are we asking of our kids? Are we allowing them to really pursue things that they're interested in? Or are we expecting them to pursue the things that we're interested in without taking into consideration who they are and what they bring to the classroom? So I think there's a lot of challenges here. I think it's, there's the local issue, what's happening in the school, there's the district issue, then there's the, the city, the state, and the federal issue. We really have to really start talking about what is the purpose of schooling. And you started with that first question for me with the beginning with Dewey, and Dewey was always talking about how we prepare to participate in our larger democratic society. I think those are some foundational questions we need to be asking. Are we doing that in our schools right now?
Yeah, and how is not doing that affecting our kids?
Yes.
How because I think it's a little bit scary. And I was going to ask Cheryl a little bit about how not doing purposeful work can be damaging to the mental and emotional growth of kids, and conversely, how doing purposeful work, how being engaged in meaningful, purposeful learning really elevates us.
I can speak to that. I also see that Judy wanted to make a comment. So let me ask, Judy, do you still want to? And then I'll dive into what you just...
Thank you for that. I just wanted to say one thing. I started my work a couple years ago in New Haven schools as a consultant by meeting with the heads of literacy and math, figuring I better start that way. And I just want to say that it was surprising to me that when I sat down to say what you were going, we were going to rethink how they could teach kindergarten and preschool and first grade, no one ever brought up, to begin with, they did not bring up child development. I was sort of amazed that they sat down with a list of what the children needed to know by the end of the year, which was a list of, 100, like counting to 120 by twos. And when I brought up, the idea of, well, what's it like to be 6? Let's start with that. That was, interestingly enough, very surprising to them, and said, that's not the way our teachers were trained. So I just wanted to get to that. It's just to say I've been trying to look at local teachers' colleges and the ones we have around here to talk about how are you training teachers, because they're not training them. I shouldn't, do that with a broad brush, but the people that I've talked to here, it really is about teaching people what they have to give out to students, and they're not looking at the big idea of where are these children and what makes people happy. So I just wanted to say, that's also something to really think about, is if we really want to make changes, we really need to change a lot of what's going on in teacher training programs.
I think you're absolutely right. And the other side of that too is that I think for a long time teachers were being trained to do exactly what you're suggesting, and then they would arrive wide-eyed and full of enthusiasm and be handed a boxed curriculum. Exactly. And be told that now, I'm sorry, all of those things that you learned about child development, those things it's good that you know them, but here's your box. And on Thursday, please be on page 32. Exactly. And so I think I think it's evolved into this situation where I think I think schools don't quite know what to do. Anyway,
Thank you.
I'd like to get back.
me,
Yeah, Cheryl, jump in. I'm sorry, I offered you a question, and I'm so glad you got Judy involved. So please go ahead.
I'm happy to jump back in, and I think it's poignant what Judy had just added, and you were building on. Let's think for a moment about community, and let's think about the importance of every human being at every age who's a part of that. And we're living through this extraordinary time with so much depression, anxiety, worry, concern among people of all ages. And it just breaks my heart to see how much this is increasing among our youngest learners, our very youngest, but people, again, of all ages. And so one of the reasons that I, again, to reinforce what I've been saying, and others are echoing it in different ways, is literally the breath of fresh air, is literally connecting with nature around us. And it doesn't have to be in a wilderness setting. It can be in the cities. In fact, we need it to be in our everyday lives. So whether it's a community garden, whether it's a small plot, whether it's a living plant in the house, whatever, it's a combination of things that help us feel, again, a connection to that which nourishes us all. And part of your question was what happens when people don't have a sense of efficacy. They don't have a sense of agency, is the word you were using. But when people can see that they can make a positive difference, I think early in this call, actually, it was as we were setting up, there was some conversation about the children at Slate School planning their gardens, planning them. And, that's just so delightful. They're going to be able to see results from their thoughtfulness, results from their actions. They're solving real problems in collaboration with one another as they go through the design and all of that. And they will as they see that project to fruit. And so on the one hand, in society now, we're seeing a lot of dis-ease, a lot of people being able to, people feeling that they can't make a positive difference. Well, turning that over, creating as much as we can to nourish one another, to be respectful of one another, to show compassion, commitment, care, community. I'll use those words again. We're going to be able to help everyone come through this and continue on through the years to come with a lot stronger sense of purpose and meaning in our lives. But I want to reinforce again with children, since that's one of the big emphases of our time together here, not to start at such a huge scale, but to really, make sure that things can be tangible and real and doable with fun and joy in the process of learning on an age-appropriate and scale-appropriate way. I think it's David Sobel who's, I'll paraphrase him. I think he's been one of your speakers in times past. But it's the idea of don't bring tragedy to a child. Let's start with things that we can do in meaningful ways together.
Beautiful. That's great. Yes, right. David's wonderful. Rebecca, I want to ask you this question, and I was thinking of it because I think it was Sylvia who was talking about the dichotomy of thought, either kids loose in the field doing whatever they want or kids sitting at a desk. And I think that you've kind of spoken to that in your conversations about this difference between purpose and passion, and how those two things actually, what the distinction is between those.
Sure, absolutely. It's an important distinction because certainly we want to have things that we are deeply interested in. We want our students to have that, our kids to have that. But having that sense of passion doesn't necessarily yield commitment. Like we were talking about, these commitments that you make. And we know from psychology research that if you look at, there's a theory of romantic love, which I think very much relates to the learning experience and anything that we love. And certainly we can have passion as one of the three components of love, but it doesn't necessarily last, right? It's something where you're like, I'm thinking about this all the time and it's burning inside of me, and then it ends. But the commitment piece, that component of love is what carries through the hard times. And many of us know that when we are learning or when we are engaged in work of any sort, there are hard times, right? And our students need to recognize that when that passion is not so readily available or accessible, you need to keep moving and continue to move towards a goal that you identified as meaningful to yourself and that is impactful, that is actually helping the world around you in some way, shape, or form. And that may mean going through times where you're lacking passion. So purpose is so much more of a driving force that we need to help our students gain and help them organize their behavior around than this idea of fleeting passion, because otherwise you're going to be changing your course and direction over and over and over again to the detriment of both yourself and the people that you were trying to make an impact upon or serve the community that you were trying to be a part of. So that's where we really want to make that important distinction for students. And also we really talk about the importance of students thinking about, what am I interested in? You know, what am I curious about? Because so many students will say, I'm not passionate about anything, or I have so many passions, right? One extreme or the other. And the reality is you just need curiosity to guide you forward. So it's, again, not putting so much on the passion side, even in the initial exploration of an idea.
Yeah, it seems like there's a third P that's needed. It's like passion and then perseverance and then purpose, or, you know, say some recipe of that. I don't know if there's actually a recipe. I can't believe we're nearly done with time, but I just want, I want to just touch for everybody. And I want to invite Brian to chime in a little bit on this first, if you wouldn't mind. We are certainly in the midst of strange days. And when I think about purpose right now, I think about how challenging it is for people who lack that right now. And I mean, we need to do things as humans, and and we need to do them. We need to do things for a reason. And I said curiosity helps in this. It helps us to know what we want to learn, but there's more than just curiosity. We need more than just defining it. You know, we're creatures of action. And in thinking about our students, whether they are graduate students or college students or high school students or, 5-year-olds, I continue to wonder what we can do to strengthen them so that they can guide us better in the future. Because I will tell you just absolutely honestly, the panels are amazing, but the most important things I've learned in my life have been from kids. And so I'm wondering, and Brian, as a dad, as a teacher, just what are some things that you think we might be able to do to strengthen our kids' muscles, so that if this comes around again, or anything like this, or anything odd and unusual, how they will be able to do better than we've done here.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Let me end on maybe not such a positive theme, but I do want to say that I think we're experiencing a lot of estrangement right now. I think we see broad-based estrangement. Rebecca and I have the joy of working with some of the highest achieving students in the country. Students that have come through this educational process that we've said have become successful. They've done a remarkable job at test scores. They've done a remarkable job producing extraordinary grades, right? They are the creme de la creme of college students. And what we see among them is profound estrangement in many cases, as high achieving as they are. 30, 40% reported rates among, high achieving institutions, quote unquote, for mental health, different kinds of mental health issues, right? We also see the rise, and I teach leadership, but the thing that concerns me is we're teaching them that they all have to be leaders in their own little individualistic, narcissistic spaces. And this is a failure of American society. It's a failure. I think Dewey would shame us for the gross individualistic ways that we've gone about instilling virtue. I often administer the Hofstede test. You talk about assessment. I do this for my scholars. I do this for my global health students. And they're always surprised. It doesn't matter how liberal they are or how socially conscious or committed to social justice many of my students are. They're always astounded to find out how incredibly individualistic they are, right? It blows their minds. I couldn't be that individualistic. I'm so liberal. I believe in Black Lives Matter. I believe in social justice. I'm a social justice warrior. She said that we can't be this individualist. Well, actually you are. You really are. You exist in your head and you exist in these spaces that you pretend are communal, but they're not. And I tell them, look, what you really need to do is you need to study indigenous traditions. You need to understand what it really looks like to be accountable to a collective. What does it really look like to make decisions as a family, right? What does it look like to actually have your grandparents have a real say in what the continuity of the family looks like? Or what does it mean to have your community have a real say in what the purposes are that you choose to dedicate your lives to? I think Lisa Latuka and Joan Stark, two great women scholars of higher education, hit this out of the ballpark when they tell us that what is desperately needed now in colleges are models of intentional learning. This is not new. They've been preaching this for 25 years, right? That intentional learning is a conscious understanding of the learning process, that students determine what, why, and how they learn, but that they also foster a true sense of accountability to the learning community. That's where I start. How are we accountable to one another in these processes? What is my accountability to you? What is your accountability? And what is our accountability to each other as we go through this process? That's what I think we're missing desperately. And I think it's producing estrangement in these processes and also in the content.
Shine a light on a very important topic. And I hate to conclude, actually, now. I would have hated to conclude anyway. But this feels like a conversation that could go on. And so maybe this will be a conversation that can be reconvened for part 2, if you're all available and willing. For now, I am just going to thank you from the bottom of my heart. You've already taught me much more than I could possibly have learned in an hour, surrounded by everything I have here. I clearly needed all of you. So thank you so much for coming and sharing your time so generously. I will conclude this gathering today as we conclude all of our meetings at Slate School. At the end of the day, we say goodbye to each other, and we ask for intentions, and then we offer each other and to the world positive rice. Positive rice to all of you. Thank you for coming, and I hope we'll be in touch again soon. Thank you for all who've listened and seen. Have a wonderful day, and thanks for coming to Slate School.